morning. I'm Charlotte Jones, co-host of the John Telford Detroit Show, coming to you every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock on Wjzz Cool TV. Also streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Dr. John Telford is a former Detroit Public Schools superintendent, a former world-class athlete, conqueror of Olympic champions, a championship track coach, poet, newspaper columnist, a longtime civil rights crusader, and author of 7 books: Creative Insubordination, What Old Men Know, The Will Robinson Story, The Poetic Prancings of Mad John, The Poet Emperor of Earth, and his explosive autobiography, A Life on the Run. Plus, another upcoming poetry book, Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs, a Detroit poetic epic. His books are available on Amazon.com or by calling 313-460-8272. That's 313-460-8272. Dr. Telford has been called a legend and also a lightning rod for controversy, a recipient of the City Council Spirit of Detroit Award and the Joe Louis Foundation Spirit of the Champ Award. He was named Wayne State University's Alumnus of the Year, and a Detroit track is named for him. His email is drjohntelfordedd@aol.com. That's dr.johntelfordedd@aol.com. Dr. Telford also has a show on WCHB AM 1340 that airs on Saturdays at 9:30 in the morning and Mondays at 6:30 in the evening. That's on WCHB AM 1340, Saturdays at 9:30 a.m. and Mondays at 6:30 p.m. And now, without further ado, I present to you that old native Detroiter, the one
Thank
and
you,
only
Char
Dr.
J,
John Telford.
a.k.a. Charlotte Jones, author of A Ain't Always for Apple. A Ain't Always for Apple.
2 volumes.
2 volumes of A Ain't Always for Apple, an erotic adult poetry book.
You do poetry.
Oh man, I always do that, man. Okay.
No poetry.
An erotic adult alphabet book.
Available on charj.com.
And this book is going to sell big time if you can just get a manager to help you peddle it.
I know.
My name is Detroit. I'm a blue-collar town. Blue salt melts my mid-March snow. Speedy cars and sprinters spring from me. I father fierce fighters and funky music. In a Motown moment, I can spit the blues right back in a bureaucrat's eye. Have you never seen blue salt? No complex chemistry here. Only the old color of a new sky. And there's a new sky dawning on Detroit today because we have got Megan Douglas, the managing editor of Riverwise magazine, that
Welcome.
great radical tome, Riverwise magazine. We've got Megan Douglas in the station today. And you know, Megan Douglas, you know, I often do a poem when I do my introduction of a guest, and I have a poem that has reminded me of some of my guests, and this poem reminds me of Megan Douglas. And the poem is The Values of Verse. Verse comes to us by pen or voice. We thus can always take our choice. Let me be also sure to mention that verse will gain us righteous vengeance via deft poetic arts that can topple oligarchs. Verse will clearly, plainly lay out what we poets dare to say out. Like gentle, mewling lambs, no more, but rather with a fearsome roar, as from some cacophonic core of lions. And we've got a lioness in the studio today in the person of Megan Douglas.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
and welcome to the station, Megan. You know, Megan, you are related to some runners. And you know, believe it or not, I'm hobbling around on a cane now, but I was a runner. And you are related, as I understand it, to a runner who broke my state quarter-mile record.
Yeah,
Way
discovered
back.
that this morning.
Yeah. Kent Bernard broke my state quarter-mile record. Kent Bernard, who actually I think was one of the coaches of my state champion Reggie Bradford, whom I sent up to the University of Michigan, and he ran on relay teams that broke all the records up there. But tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, about your connection to running, anything else that you want to talk about, your connection to Jamaica,
Yeah.
down the way where the nights are gay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you first of all for having me here today. I'm excited about it.
Well, I wouldn't have missed it,
Yeah.
particularly since you got one of my poems in there now.
Yeah.
And you're going to publish something else I wrote, which I forget, but
Yeah.
that'll be good.
Yeah. Okay. Just a little bit about me. I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But my father was from North Carolina,
Okay.
and my mother was from Jamaica. So they met at a reggae concert
Oh yeah.
in the early
Bob Marley
70s.
and company. Oh,
Yeah, and you know the rest is history. I was raised mostly in the like Ypsi area,
Okay.
and came to Detroit about 6 years ago, and you know have kind of like bounced my life back and forth between the United States and Jamaica a little bit. So prior to moving back here, I had been in Jamaica for about 8 or 9 years. I was running like an organic farm there, and doing
In Jamaica?
yeah, because that's one of my passions too, is like farming, and then came back to the States, and yeah, so now I'm here. I got connected to Riverwise. I'm also at Wayne State right now, getting my PhD
Oh wow.
in cultural anthropology.
All right.
And so, and I mean, just lifelong, no matter what I've been doing, social justice has been like a thread throughout my entire life.
Amen.
My family, like, you know, I have family members who were prominent politicians and.
In Jamaica?
Yeah.
You know, I got to tell you,
Yeah.
I ran against some Jamaicans.
Okay.
And they are something else.
They sure are.
They give the U.S. sprinters hell. And I'm not just talking about Usain Bolt. I'm talking about the old days with George Roden
Yeah.
and Herb McKinley. I beat George Roden.
They
He was
say
Olympic
it's our
champion.
yam and cocoa and dasheen in Jamaica. Root plants give you. Yeah.
There's a couple of runners out of Jamaica. They ran for Arizona State. I'm trying to think of their names.
Yeah.
Track and field news call them the Gold Dust Twins, but I ran
Yeah.
against both of them, beat both of them. Ran against a runner named George Carr, ran for Illinois, and he beat me. He was a Jamaican.
Yeah.
And I ran against George Roden, who was the Olympic champion out of Jamaica, and I had his picture on my wall when I was in high school. He was making a comeback when I beat him. Felt like apologizing to him. But anyway, if you get me talking about track, we won't talk about anything else. So tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of, I came to Riverwise because of the, I was at Detroit People's Platform one day actually interviewing one of the transportation team coordinators, Renard Munchinsky. And as I was leaving, I saw Eric, the last managing editor of Riverwise, and he had a stack of magazines, and we rode the elevator down together, and I was like, what's this you got going on? And we just struck up a conversation, and he invited me to come to one of the collective meetings, and I did, and fell in love with the concept of Riverwise, with the community around Riverwise, and just started volunteering and did that for a couple of years, and then unfortunately Eric had a pretty severe stroke a couple of years ago, and we had really wanted to run the magazine together, but I stepped into the role that he had And yeah, so and I'm just like, trying to carry on that work. And I think if you don't know about Riverwise, you should.
And so how was it
Absolutely.
started?
So Riverwise was founded. It kind of sprung up as an idea right around when the Citizen went out of business, and a lot of the journalists who have been a part of that team, like Eric, like Shay Howell,
Oh, Shay, yeah.
like Kari Frazier, people who had come from the Citizen said, well, we can't just let Citizen focused and led journalism die in the city. And so there was like a core of people who were kind of coalesced around like stuff going on at the Bog Center. And they made the decision, well, let's start a community rag. And that was how it was born at that time. And it really started as let's bring a high quality magazine that's about Detroit, for Detroiters, about social justice, that centers, especially, right, in the last, specifically, Detroit's always had a conflicted history with stories being told, what stories are being told about Detroit, but especially since emergency management was ushered in, the erasure of poor, black, indigenous people in the narratives is just blatant.
And the takeover of the Detroit schools
Yeah.
by emergency management, which is what I've been fighting
Yeah.
for quite some time.
I mean, if you read a lot of mainstream narratives about Detroit, they'll say things specific. Detroit is a blank slate. Detroit's the new frontier.
Mhm.
Detroit is a canvas, and it's like, really easily, if you don't take your voice, they will write you out of the story.
That's right.
And that's Riverwise is really centered on making sure that, because you see how capitalism functions. Sometimes there's the best thing you can do is to make sure that there was a historical record that you were ever a part of this time and place, so that there's something even for future generations to say we were here. And I think Riverwise functions in a couple of ways, both as a historical record and also a we're here, we're now, and things could be different, and people are working on it actively to make sure that Detroiters aren't cut out of the conversation, to make sure black, brown people, indigenous people, poor people, anybody fighting against this fascist genocidal system
the ones we
is
got in
not
Congress
ignored.
right now, we got a lot
Yeah.
of them there, the
Yeah.
Trumpists. But, Riverwise, and you called it a radical rag, I think, or if you didn't call it, I'm calling it that. Because we are leftist radicals, let's face it, that's what we need. We need a magazine like Riverwise in Detroit and in Michigan, just like we need a paper like the Detroit Native Sun, the Detroit Native Sun in Detroit and Michigan, and we need a paper like the Metro Times in Detroit and Michigan. I don't have a copy of the Metro Times to hold up right now, but this is a copy of the Detroit Native Sun, in which this particular June issue, in addition to my Telford Telescope, I do an article called Local Controversies, and I talk about the controversies in the schools and also the controversy right at my home building, the River House, which you can read about if you get this paper. It's still on the stands.
And I'll just say shout out to Metro Times too, because they help us with distribution.
Good.
And I'm also going to say shout out to Outlier Media, because they do a whole lot of community-led journalistic engagement. They have a group called the Detroit Documenters who will go into city council meetings. They go into police commissioner meetings, and they live tweet it. They give up, so things are being recorded. And also to Planet Detroit, because they do a whole lot on the climate justice front for Detroit. So yeah, so there's a renaissance of local journalism. And shout out to the DJEF run through the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, because they are really helping fund a lot of grassroots
I want to say shout out to the
Activist.
Metro Times because I was featured in the Metro Times
Yeah.
That's
last
right.
November.
Yeah, you sure were.
You can find it online.
Yeah. So there is,
She was featured
People
because
try,
of
but-
because of her book A Ain't
Yes.
Always for Apple, which is going to be a big seller, and Valerie Lockhart, publishes the Detroit Native Sun.
And she was
Yeah.
here last week.
Yeah, and she was here, and I want to give her a shout out,
Mm-hmm.
as well as a shout out to Lee DeVito, who is
Yeah.
doing some great stuff with the Metro Times. These are the publications that Detroiters need to read, because unfortunately
And support.
and support
Yeah.
and support. And while Detroiters are at it, they might want to support a poetry book called Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs, a Detroit poetic epic, which is my latest poetry book. And the best way to order it is probably on Amazon, because it talks about athletes, of course, those that I've raced against and those that I've coached and those that I've teamed with, and also my activism, because I've been a social activist all my life. And also the Apple Boughs is a reference to a poem by the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas, on which he talks about his days with the ladies as a youngster, as I do also in this book. And this is my other poetry book. It was my first poetry book, Poetic Prancings of Mad John. And so I ask that you patronize me by purchasing these books. You can get them on Amazon. That's how I stay on the air. We are interviewing Megan Douglas. Megan Douglas, the managing editor of Wjzz magazine today, and she's telling us a little bit about how she came up and about her life, and then we're going to ask her some questions about the magazine itself. So Megan, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we're going to get into some of these questions that Chara and I have.
I think if I had anything to say about myself, because usually I don't like to center myself in the conversation at all.
Unlike me.
Yeah.
I love to talk about my running.
I think that.
Do you have a degree in publishing or editorial?
No, my degrees. So I went to the University of Michigan. My undergraduate degree is in political science,
Yes.
and then I have a master's in anthropology from the University of Central Florida, and now I'm working on my PhD at Wayne State. So communications in terms of what people typically think of that a journalist goes through isn't the path that I came to through this. But as an anthropologist, the field has, for those of us who want to remain relevant, have realized that writing in a highly academic, jargony way where you actually have to have a degree in one specific field to understand what that person is saying is the perfect way to kill your academic field. And I think there have been so many interesting and revolutionary ideas that come out of anthropology, but a lot of people don't know because the writing is so off-putting. So some of our fundamental and foundational ideas that we have as social justice activists came from
Anthropology.
a lot of those fields. And I think my desire to write in this way was that I don't want that to be my legacy as a writer. I want to write for the public. I want my writings to resonate and coalesce with people, and I also want my career to be about a conversation with other people, organic intellectualism, because I think I meet people all the time who don't have any kind of degrees and are light years beyond in terms of the way they can synthesize and analyze and understand. And I think so for me, academia is more of an exercise in another kind of rigor, but is not some kind of gate, to being able to produce something like this.
Because there are a lot of people not working in the field and they're thriving in the field that they didn't even study for. So I understand.
Yeah.
You know, Megan, I use my poetry to make progressive political comments.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, I use it almost like a weapon sometimes. Have you ever thought of writing poetry? In that
Yeah.
regard?
I dabble in poetry, and actually in the next edition, it'll be coming out in mid-July. I wrote a poem, and like I said, I don't really love like promoting myself, but a member of the collective offered it up for
Good,
publication,
good,
and so I
good.
said, okay, then I'll do it. So yeah, I think like music, like fine art, like all of those poetry is one of those things that speaks to masses of people. I
That's
think
right.
that there's a way that, like, because I think musicians are
Music,
poets,
music,
right?
yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
and artists are like, visual poets. And I think,
Songwriters
yeah,
and poets.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that there's just something that cuts through all of the extra need for hundreds of words when you have. So, yeah, yeah.
Do you recall the poem that you're putting in the?
Mhm.
Let's hear it.
I would have to pull it up. I don't have it by memory.
Can you pull it up?
I can.
Good.
Okay.
While you're doing that,
Put me on
how
the spot.
often does the magazine come out?
So it's quarterly.
Okay.
Sometimes based on like funding or like, because we're small. I'm the managing editor, and then the only other like actual staff is Valerie Jean Blakely. She's a photographer here in the city. She does movement photography. And she's also on the member of the People's Water Board. She
Oh, okay.
has done, formerly used to like head up the Poor People's Campaign, their Detroit chapter. So she's has done a whole lot of water rights work in
The
Detroit.
People's Water Board. That's been an issue with Tawana Petty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tawana's one of our
Right.
really great friends.
Yeah. And she's
so,
a poet too, by the way.
Yeah, she just led a poetry workshop for us. That our last community
She does haiku.
workshop was.
She's a haiku expert.
At We the People of Michigan headquarters. She ran a poetry workshop for us called "Visionary Resistance to the Systems of
Oh,
Ridiculous."
right. That sounds like
So,
Tawana.
yeah.
Here's a poem.
So here's a poem.
Here it comes. Here it comes.
So I actually wrote this. I'll give you a little bit of the context. Especially because, so about a month ago, I was invited by the National Council of Elders to come to a conversation on Haley Farms in Tennessee.
Okay.
Haley Farm, Alex Haley, after he passed away,
Yeah.
his land was bought by the Children's Defense Fund,
Both are
and they
roots.
turned it
Roots.
into like a social justice kind of. You can have meetings there. It's beautiful. And I got to go there, and it's a little bit like relevant too because Gus Newport, one of the elders, he was the former mayor of like Berkeley, and he did a lot of work around the country on housing rights, school rights. Well, he just passed away this week. But I wrote this poem while I was at that summit, kind of in response to a lot of the things we were talking about, because we were really trying to figure out, there's a lot of conflict in movement space these days, and there's like just these, how do we work through these challenges and stay connected to the issue, like understanding the fights that might be going on even within an organization, but staying connected to the main goal. So that's what this poem was written in response to.
Good.
And it's called Fat on Freedom.
Say it again.
Fat on Freedom.
Fat on freedom.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, here we go. As we prepare for the long haul, we asked, what is guiding, fueling, feeding our work? All this conflict is a part of movement, but at what point does too much friction stop us from moving? How are we healing and loving ourselves into the future? They said our body politic was looking a little thin, a little hungry, so we have to start getting fat on freedom, get thick on the love of liberation, bear and carry this weight as we nourish ourselves on grace, community, justice, and love, contradicting norms as we get lighter and lighter the fuller we are. It's time to stop hitting the drive-through of misanthropic, philanthropic, empty caloric value, fast fund on Happy Meals. Instead, let's feast on the fat back of fellowship. Let's slow down and Let our radical bellies swell on education, deep attention, compassion. Let's wobble as we walk, hand in hand with those with whom we break up systematically oppressive bread. Let's take all these capitalist, misogynist, racist, classist, supremacist, trans, and homophobic chickens coming home to roost and fry them crisp and serve them at our next block party and watch our communal hips widen until they are so broad we can readily birth new nations and ensure that no matter where we walk, movement will be involved. Just as a pebble in the stream can create ripples, let's allow our collective cankles of curiosity to grow so thick that when we dip them in the water of the world, they create tidal waves. Let's gorge on radical love until we can quantify its power by the metric ton. Let's be the elephant in the room. I was told that power is the ability to shape reality. So let's make that shape so juicy, so jiggly, it's irresistible and delectable. Even in the midst of gunshots, even as they tell us our size is detrimental to our security, I'm going to keep growing, keep serving fat sandwiches to my people, keep getting chunky on change, keep getting fat on freedom.
All right.
I love the metaphors of widening
Yeah,
that you
And
use in
thickness.
this, and thickness. And now I got a poem. You know, this is one I like to sneak in at the end of the show, but I'm going to do it now instead. On this evil and fatal occasion of the Capitol building's invasion, the traitor Trump's collusion demands his execution. God yet hasn't pushed the lever on the traitor Trump forever. And when he does, it can only be hoped that the lever is that of the gas chamber. But it's not going to be. But at least it'll be the lever of Leavenworth Prison. I hope that it's the lever of the prison, but he doesn't go in there as president and pardon himself because of some of the things that are happening right now that are very upsetting in this world.
So,
but go ahead.
So
go ahead.
being able to get your poetry out there, because that does speak volumes to what needs to be said. So that's one of the reasons why independent media is so important. What's another reason you feel that it's so important?
Well, you know, one of the things that really draws me to Riverwise is by family ancestry, we're all educators. So going back to my great grandmothers, education was a real big part of our lives and my life. And I think when Riverwise was first started, the understanding was how important community-led journalism was. But I think there was a little bit of a everybody's just going to know already how to gather their thoughts in a way that is like a poet, or that is because some of these are long form articles, some are some is poetry. And I think Riverwise really helps me connect with that educator in me, right? So we host workshops. If you ever thought that you could maybe be a poet, we have workshops on that, right? I think that there's so many barriers a lot of times, especially in the Black, brown, and poor community, to being able to fulfill our creative sides. Everybody tells us how productive we can be in an industrial space, right? Everybody needs our labor, but a lot of times, even knowing how fundamental Black, brown, and indigenous people have been to creative outputs, their creative outputs aren't necessarily given value in widespread space.
So what you're saying is they want us to build their cars and lay their bricks, but they don't want to see our minds at work.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so there's not a lot. I mean, you can look at it the cutting of funding for the arts in schools, the cutting out of music programs, the cutting out of, when people look at you and say, oh, you went to college and you got a literature degree, as if we're only supposed to be about making money. Right? And I think that this kind of stuff, when people are able to put their creative energy to work, we know we live in an oppressive society. Sometimes this is an outlet that'll be the difference between somebody having a mental breakdown and being able to make it through what this system is.
That's right.
Because some of the songs and stuff that are out there, this is about people's lives.
Yeah.
This is about, and they're making millions of dollars off of things that affected them when they were children.
Yeah.
So that's another way to make money. You don't just have to make money
Exactly.
with your physical strength, you can use your mind.
Exactly.
You're watching the Dr. John Telfer Detroit Show live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and other top social media platforms. Like, follow, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. And we have the WJZZ Legacy Jazz Series. It's the premier showcase for globally recognized and emerging artists. And on Thursday, July 13th at 7 p.m., we are featuring the Matt LaRusso Trio with special guest vocalist Taylor Smith. It will be at the Aretha Jazz Cafe, which is at 350 Madison Street. Tickets are just $20, and they are available on Eventbrite. Okay.
Thank you, Char J, for that station identification. Char J, author of A Ain't Always for Apples.
Available at sharjay.com.
Yes. And I've got to say, too, that Keith Williams, I'm meeting with Keith Williams, by the way, at noon at the Yacht Club. I'm meeting him and meeting economist Toino Reeves, who's been on this show twice, because we're meeting about reparations. And Keith, of course, is he wrote the whole proposal R, successful reparations referendum, the one that passed by 80% of Detroiters voted for that. And we're going to be working with the Detroit City Council President Mary Sheffield, and also the lady who's the chair of that committee, Lauren Hood. And we're going to be talking about that at noon today, and planning to do that. And lest I forget it, also I will be attending this coming Saturday the funeral of Orland Jones. Orland Jones, matter of fact, I'm going there with my old quarter miler, Reggie Bradford, who was all-state quarter miler for me at Pershing High. Orland Jones was Mr. Pershing. He was a city champion hurdler for Pershing, and he also has been the major Pershing booster for these many years. Orland just passed, and his funeral is going to be at Vernon Chapel Church, 18500 Norwood, Detroit, Michigan 48234. That's Vernon Chapel Church at 18500 Norwood at 11 o'clock in the morning on that day, this coming Saturday. So I'll be there, Reggie Bradford will be there, all of the Pershing people will be there, and anyone else who wants to attend should be there. That's Orland Jones. We have lost the great Orland Jones.
We also want to send out prayers to
Malik
Thank
Shabazz.
you.
Malik
I
Shabazz.
mentioned that we were going
He's
to
in
do that.
Ford Hospital
Yes, he is.
in critical condition, suffering from a heart attack, and we all need to pray for Malik's successful recovery, because Malik has been one of the best activists
Yes,
for
he has.
for righteous causes in the city for many years, and also he's married to Wanda Redmond, who was one of the board members that appointed me superintendent back in 2012 for the Detroit Public Schools. But Malik is a fighter,
Our prayers
and
go out to him
our
and his
prayers,
family.
we ask for prayers for Minister Malik Shabazz. And we are interviewing Megan Douglas, the managing editor of Riverwise Magazine, probably the most intellectual magazine maybe in the state for liberal activists. So Megan, tell us a little bit speak about Riverwise Magazine and its role as a space for community-led journalism.
Okay. Yeah, so when you were just introducing as the most intellectual, I always get really a little because that word can be intimidating to people, and I think really I want everybody to know that there's a place for them in Riverwise, and I think whether or not you are okay, I'm already a proficient writer, or something that I want to do, we're here to help you, so if there's something you're I have a cause that I want to write about, but I don't even have the capacity to do it, right? Because I'm, out here actually doing this work. We'll help you figure that out. If you want to submit something, we'll help you edit it and get it to a place where it's, it's clean and polished. And I think Riverwise kind of lives as its own little entity, right? It's shaped by the people. So we have, I guess I should kind of explain the structure. Like I said, there's only 2 people who work full-time on staff.
So your articles come from individuals, and then you guys edit them and put. Okay. All right.
But we do a whole lot of. So we have a collective of editorial team members who are volunteers from across the city and beyond, like people who just understand the importance of a magazine like Riverwise and then volunteer their time to help us. And I can't state enough how amazing our collective is and how helpful they are and how important they are. And then we have a crew of people who show up regularly. We have a political education series, and we kind of unpack through activist readings and writings like some of the bigger ideas that are going on. So the last one that we had was on the contradictions between narratives of violence that come out of the state and narratives of violence that come from the people, right? Because apparently to the state, it's violent to have a headlight out, right? And that's warrant and cause. It's violence to the state to maybe have a counterfeit bill, right? It's violence to the state to be running through a neighborhood that you don't have a house in, right? So yeah, right. That's what the
and
state.
Some of them where you do have a
exactly,
house
or some of them where you do have a house.
Right.
and
Right.
yeah. So and we're like, no, it's violence to have people with 0 homes when you have a city with all kinds of properties sitting around fallow. It's violence to have children in schools where lead water is being pumped through the pipes. It's violence to have a city that's this big and have all the schools shut down. Right? Like that, to me, is violence. And so, that's the kind of stuff we'll unpack in these workshops. And we have a pretty dedicated crew of people who come out, and we're always getting new people to come. And they're really good. Like, people don't want to leave at the end of the night. Like, you get to meet like-minded individuals. We have some really great conversations. Dr. Telford came to the last one. And then it's also intergenerational and intersectional. So at the last one, even I think the oldest person who was there was one of our readers. She was 99.
Yeah, what was her name?
Helen Gentry.
Yes.
And she was phenomenal. So we had
phenomenal.
I think she said she was 99, right? And the youngest person in the room was 18.
Okay.
And we all came together. So it's not. There's nobody that it's for, and there's nobody that it's not for. Right, Riverwise really tries to be a space that is open and safe and inviting to anybody who wants to get down with this idea that there's a way to build beloved community. It's not just fluffy wording, right? That there is a way out of these systems right now are not inevitable, right? Just like they talk about the founding fathers all the time, it means that some people sat down in a room and created those things. So we can do that too. And a lot of people in the city are doing it. You look at a lot of people in our constellation, for example, over at Feed 'em Freedom Growers, they're showing how it is that you can have an urban garden and an intellect space and a space where people feel safe to come and throw their events, right?
That one right out here.
Manistee.
Yeah.
There's the Food Security Network, right? There's all kinds of stuff going around in the city that I always say is the parallel universe, where people are showing right now actively that there are other ways to structure our society that bring safety for everybody and not just billionaires.
Okay.
Yeah. And back to your question, sorry, that's anybody can tell that story, and anybody should be able to tell that story. That there's these stories, of the way people are putting it all together, and they're not always the leader of a movement. They're just people living their experience and having a platform to tell their story.
So why not have advertisers? You don't want that?
No. We're uninterested in anybody ever thinking that we're
can be bought.
compromised by anybody else.
We don't want to be bought.
Yeah. And, you know, and we've also looked at, like, what the cost of it is to produce the magazine, because it's not cheap. And what we would have to charge an advertiser for it to make sense. And so we've played with the idea of maybe certain organizations being able to do that, but then it gets into a slippery slope. And I think as long as possible that we can stay ad-free, we're going to try. Now, there may come a day when it's like, well, to pay the bills, we might have to do some of that. But we hope that we never do. Right? And we also, but also in the same vein, that's why we keep it free. Right? We want as few barriers as possible to anybody getting a story that speaks to their experience. Right? Like, we really want this to not just serve as a way for people to tell their story, but also for people in the city, you know, like you always say, like, the surveillance stuff. Like, we actually want to be seen, not watched. Right? And Riverwise is a way for people to be seen and heard. And we want that to be available on as wide of a platform as possible. Mm-hmm.
Talk about why it's so important, which it is, to support independent media, like the Metro Times, like Riverwise Magazine, like the Detroit Native Sun.
Mm-hmm. I mean, first of all, you see what can happen. I think if we just look over the last couple of years and the ability for the mainstream media, I mean, what Fox just had to settle, they didn't have to admit to the lie, but I think a near $1 billion settlement says enough that, like, they have these huge platforms and they can just lie and they can sow discord and they can
and they
right?
mislead.
Yeah,
so
misleading.
many people.
And so, you know, I think
that's how we got Trump elected. That's
Yeah.
how we got elected. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, just through lying. And I think so, even if we're just one small space that is saying, we're not drinking that Kool-Aid, no thank you, like, we know the truth, we're staying, paying attention, and that it's not, none of us are billionaires bought out, like, doing any of that kind of stuff. Nobody who's writing for Riverwise has some kind of agenda that is about personal profit or motive, right? Like, these stories that they're writing are because of their fears for the earth, the fears for their children, their hopes for their community. Like, that's what we get in Riverwise, are people who, you know, there's an excellent story coming up a couple of stories coming up in the next edition, so be on the lookout for that connect, you know, the militarism and the police brutality that's going on in Atlanta with Cop City, with these attempts in Michigan to expand Camp Grayling, right? And why the solidarity between Atlanta and Detroit is so important, right? Because we've got this, like, over-bloated police budget, and we know that throwing more money at the police hasn't ever solved the problem. Like, zero has ever solved the problem. It's only brought more danger into our communities.
Right.
And, you know, it's really sad, you know, to go to a meeting, and because people are so frustrated with the violence and crime in their communities, see them advocating for increased surveillance and policing in their own community, because the system refuses to just say, hey, like, maybe if we put a park in your community, maybe if we built recreational programs, maybe if we actually fully funded the schools, maybe if we made sure people were housed. So I
perish
think,
the thought.
yeah, perish the thought.
Help the kids, you know, make sure they can read. Oh,
No way, we gotta fill the prisons.
You're watching WJZZ Cool TV. Live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and other top social media platforms. Like, follow, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. So I need you to...
Before you say that, let me say this. Miss Virginia Starkey, fondly known simply as V, the proprietress of V's Boutique, offers a wide range of fine clothing and accessories for ladies. You can find all sizes of women's fine apparel in V's one-stop excellent customer service at V's Boutique that you can't find anywhere else in Detroit anymore. V's is at 16423 East Warren Avenue, right around the corner from the old Alger Theater and one of the few libraries that's still open in the city of Detroit. And V herself can be reached to make an appointment at 586-405-3020. That's 586-405-3020. So patronize V's Boutique for ladies.
So can you sum up what do you want people to know, where you're trying to go with the magazine, and how they can reach out to you?
Of course. Yeah, so you can, so Riverwise Magazine is a print magazine. We're also always going to try and keep that going. We don't want to go fully digital, especially knowing in Detroit that not everybody has access to the internet reliably. So you can find it for sure at the General Baker Institute. We'll have a distribution box at 27th Letter Books. But also we are online, so we're at riverwisedetroit.org. If you subscribe, it'll just start showing up for free at your home whenever it's quarterly. So that's riverwisedetroit.org/subscribe. We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Riverwise Magazines, and that's where you can really keep see and if you have a community event going on, send it to us. Our email is riverwiseinthed@gmail.com. We'll post it across our social media for you.
Say that again.
Riverwise in the D. So our Riverwise RIVERWISEINTHED@gmail.com. And yeah, if you subscribe or email us at that same address, we'll add you to our list so you can know about when workshops and political ad are coming up. Subscribe to the magazine, submit your work, tell us an idea that you want help with. Come join us if you ever had aspirations to learn how to run a magazine. Come join us. We'll find a way to connect what you're doing with the work that we're trying to do.
Alrighty, that's going to do it for us. I thank you for joining us. It was nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And there we go. So we're still live.
John Telford Detroit Show with Dr. John Telford and co-host Charlotte Jones on WJZZ Detroit Internet Television, coming to you live every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. Also streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Contact Dr. Telford at 313-460-8272. That's 313-460-8272. Or at Dr. John Telford, EDD, at AOL.com. That's DRJOHNTELFORDEDD at AOL.com. To sponsor or appear on this show, or to get signed copies of his book, which Gil Perkins, Jeffrey Feiger, and Dr. Wayne Dyer all called spellbinding and sensational. It was the late, great Dr. Wayne Dyer who said, Dr. John Telford has a warrior's heart and a poet's soul. Read Dr. Telford's commentaries on the schools and other vital topics in the Telford Telescope column in the Detroit Native Sun newspaper. And also hear him on his other station, WCHB AM 1340, every Saturday morning at 9:30 and Monday evening at 6:30. That's every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. and Monday evening at 6:30 p.m. on WCHB AM 1340. Tune in again next Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock to the John Telford Detroit Show here on WJZZ Cool TV with Dr. Telford and co-host Charlotte Jones. Thank you for listening to the John Telford Detroit Show.